Imagine working two demanding jobs, barely making ends meet, completely unaware that your bank account have billions.
Already?
This isn't a fantasy.
So tired.
It's the unbelievable true story of a young woman who was heir to a tech giant, while living paycheck to paycheck. How did she discover her secret fortune, and what happened when her humble life collided with an empire? The alarm clock screamed at 4:47 a.m., cutting through the thin walls of the studio apartment like a knife. Maya Tibbet slapped at it blindly, her hand knocking over an empty instant noodle cup before finding the button. She lay there for exactly 30 seconds, her daily luxury, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a map of nowhere she could afford to visit. At 26 years old, Maya was already intimately familiar with exhaustion, the kind that settled into your bones and made a permanent home there. She rolled out of the narrow bed, her feet finding the cold linoleum floor, and began the mechanical routine she had perfected over 3 years of this life. Shower. 3 minutes to save on the water bill. Toast with peanut butter because eggs were for weekends. Coffee from yesterday's grounds because fresh was wasteful. The bathroom mirror showed her exactly what she expected: dark circles under brown eyes, black hair pulled into a practical ponytail, the face of someone who had stopped expecting surprises from life. By 5:30 a.m., Maya was walking the 6 blocks to Brew and Bean Cafe, saving the bus fare. The November morning in Seattle was dark and wet, the kind of rain that was more mist than droplets, soaking through her second-hand jacket slowly, persistently. Her phone, cracked screen held together with clear tape, buzzed with a reminder she had set for herself: "You've got this. Just one more day." The cafe smelled like salvation when she pushed through the door. Warm, fragrant, alive with the promise of caffeine and comfort she provided to others but rarely afforded herself. "Morning, Maya," called Tom, the manager, a genuinely kind man in his 50s who paid as fairly as the business allowed, which was to say, not quite enough. "Morning," she replied, tying on her green apron, her hands already reaching for the espresso machine before her brain fully engaged. This was muscle memory now. Pull shots, steam milk, smile at customers, repeat. The morning rush was a blur of orders shouted over the hiss of the milk frother and the grinding of beans. Maya navigated it all with practiced efficiency, her hands moving in a ballet she had choreographed through thousands of repetitions. She knew the regulars by their orders before they spoke. The businessman who needed his triple espresso before he could form sentences. The college student who counted out exact change in quarters. The young mother who always looked as tired as Maya felt. Between customers, Maya's mind wandered to the afternoon ahead. She had a 3-hour window between jobs, her only real break. Usually she spent it at the library, the one place with free Wi-Fi and heating where nobody questioned why you sat for hours. Sometimes she studied online courses she could not quite afford to finish. Sometimes she just sat, letting her mind go blank, recharging for the second shift. At 2 p.m., she clocked out, her feet already aching. Tom handed her the daily tip share, $17.32. She smiled her thanks and pocketed it, mentally allocating it to the electricity bill that was coming due. The library was warm and quiet. Maya found her usual spot in the back corner, near the biographies nobody read anymore. She pulled out her laptop, a 6-year-old model that groaned when it started up, and opened her email, mostly out of habit. The inbox was the usual mix: promotional emails for things she could not buy, a reminder that her phone bill was due, a message from her landlord about a rent increase starting next month. And then, sandwiched between a sale on yoga pants and a political petition, there was something different. The sender was listed as Whitmore and Associates LLP. The subject line read, "Urgent matter regarding your family estate, response required." Maya's first instinct was to delete it. She had learned years ago that anything claiming to be urgent and involving money was usually a scam. Nigerian princes, long-lost relatives, lottery winnings, she had seen them all. Her finger hovered over the delete button, but something made her pause. The email address looked legitimate. The formatting was professional, not the usual jumble of fonts and exclamation points that screamed fraud. She clicked it open, her heart rate barely elevated. Scammers were getting more sophisticated, she figured. Dear Ms. Maya Tibbet, this correspondence concerns a matter of considerable importance regarding your legal inheritance. We represent the estate of Jonathan Tibbet, and our records indicate you as a beneficiary. We understand this may come as a surprise, and we assure you this is a legitimate legal matter. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to discuss the details of this inheritance and the necessary steps to process your claim. Time-sensitive documentation requires your attention. Cordially, Richard Whitmore, Senior Partner. Whitmore and Associates LLP. Maya read it twice, then a third time. Jonathan Tibbet. The name stirred something in her memory, distant and painful like an old bruise. Her father's name had been Jonathan, the father she had not seen since she was 7 years old, when he had walked out after yet another screaming match with her mother. The father who had sent exactly 3 birthday cards, ages 8, 9, and 10, before the silence became permanent. The father her mother refused to discuss, her face closing down like a door slamming shut whenever Maya asked. Her mother had died 4 years ago, breast cancer that had spread too far before they caught it, leaving Maya with medical debt and a grief that still ambushed her in quiet moments. She had mourned the loss of ever knowing her father's story then, assuming he was either dead or so uninterested that it amounted to the same thing. She stared at the email, her mind cycling through possibilities. Could this be real? Could her absent father have left her something? And if he had, why now? Why not when she was struggling to pay for her mother's funeral? Why not when she was 17 and trying to figure out how to afford college? The skepticism won. Maya closed the laptop, convincing herself it was an elaborate phishing scheme. They had probably scraped her name and her mother's name from some public record and cobbled together a convincing story. She had work in 3 hours. She could not afford to waste mental energy on fantasy. But the email nagged at her. That evening, as she pushed an industrial vacuum across the gleaming floors of a downtown office building, she kept thinking about it. Her second job was for a cleaning company that serviced corporate high-rises after hours. She worked from 6 p.m. to midnight, usually alone, moving through silent spaces that hummed with expensive technology and designer furniture. Tonight she was assigned to the 14th floor of a building occupied by various tech companies and law firms. The irony was not lost on her as she emptied trash cans from lawyers' offices, wondering if any of them were like this Whitmore person. Probably not. Real lawyers did not send random emails to baristas about inheritances. At 11:47 p.m., as she was finishing up a conference room, her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, local area code. She almost did not answer. Who called this late unless it was an emergency or a scam? But something made her pick up. Maya answered the call cautiously, her voice tired from the long day. On the other end was a male voice that sounded professional and controlled, carrying the faint impatience of someone accustomed to authority. He confirmed her identity as Ms. Maya Tibbet, immediately putting her on guard. After she acknowledged him, he introduced himself as Richard Whitmore, a senior partner at Whitmore and Associates. He explained that he had sent her an email earlier that day concerning her father's estate and asked whether she had reviewed it. Maya's heart started hammering. Scammers did not usually make phone calls. They hid behind screens and broken English. This man sounded like he was calling from an actual office, not a call center in another country. I saw it, she said carefully. But I don't understand. My father and I haven't had contact in almost 20 years. I don't even know if he's alive. There was a pause on the other end. When Whitmore spoke again, his voice had shifted, softer, more human. Ms. Tibbet, I'm sorry to inform you that your father passed away 3 weeks ago. He had a massive stroke. It was very sudden. The words hit Maya like a physical blow. She sat down hard on the edge of the conference table, her free hand gripping the polished wood. Her father was dead. The possibility of ever knowing him, ever getting answers, ever hearing him explain why he left, all of it was gone. She had spent years not thinking about him, building walls around that abandonment, and now those walls were crumbling under the weight of finality. Miss Tibbet? Are you still there? Yes, she managed, her voice barely a whisper. I'm here. I understand this is difficult, Whitmore continued. But there are legal matters that require your immediate attention. Your father's will names you as his primary beneficiary. We need to meet in person to discuss the details and begin the probate process. Would you be available tomorrow morning? Say, 10 o'clock at our offices? Maya's mind was reeling. Beneficiary. Her father had remembered her. After all these years of silence, he had included her in his will. But what could he possibly have left her? The man had abandoned his family. For all she knew, he had spent the last 2 decades living under a bridge. I work tomorrow morning, she said, the words automatic. Then she caught herself. A man was telling her about her dead father and an inheritance, and she was worried about her shift at the cafe. I mean, I can try to get someone to cover for me. Where is your office? Whitmore gave her an address in downtown Seattle, in one of the gleaming towers Maya cleaned but never entered during daylight hours. They confirmed 10 o'clock the next morning, and he hung up with a crisp, "We'll see you then." Maya sat in the empty conference room for a long time after the call ended, the vacuum cleaner humming beside her, forgotten. Her father was dead. The words kept repeating in her mind, but they did not feel real. How do you mourn someone you barely remembered? Someone who had existed more as an absence than a presence? She thought about the few memories she had. A man with dark hair lifting her onto his shoulders at a park. Strong hands teaching her to ride a bike. A deep laugh that rumbled in his chest. And then nothing but the echo of a door slamming, her mother's tears, and the slow realization that he was not coming back. At midnight, Maya clocked out and began the long walk home. She could not afford an Uber, and the buses stopped running in her neighborhood after 11. The rain had picked up, turning from mist to a steady drizzle, but she barely noticed. Her mind was miles away, circling the same questions over and over. What had her father's life been like after he left? Had he thought about her? Did he have other children, a new family? And why, after all this time, had he left her anything at all? Back in her studio apartment, Maya stood under the hot shower longer than her usual 3 minutes, letting the water wash away the grime of the day and the shock of the evening. She set her alarm for 8 o'clock, she would need time to prepare for this meeting, and lay in bed, staring at the water stain on the ceiling. Sleep did not come easily. When it finally did, her dreams were confused tangles of corporate offices and childhood memories, her father's face always just out of reach. The next morning, Maya stood in front of her tiny closet, staring at her limited options. She owned exactly 2 outfits that could be considered business casual, a pair of black slacks with a small stain on the hem she had learned to hide, and a gray blazer she had bought at Goodwill for a job interview 2 years ago. She paired them with her only white blouse and her least scuffed pair of shoes. Looking in the mirror, she saw someone trying very hard to look like they belonged in places they did not. The blazer was slightly too big. The shoes were department store clearance from 5 years ago. But it was the best she could do. The bus downtown was crowded with morning commuters in expensive suits and designer bags. Maya clutched her second-hand purse, containing exactly 1 pen, her cracked phone, a nearly empty wallet, and her state ID, and tried not to feel like an imposter. Around her, people scrolled through the latest smartphones and sipped lattes that cost more than she made in an hour. The address Whitmore had given her was in Columbia Tower, one of the tallest buildings in Seattle. Maya had cleaned offices in this building exactly twice, filling in for sick colleagues. She remembered the pristine marble lobby, the elevator banks that moved so smoothly you barely felt them ascending, the floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of Elliott Bay that made the city look like a photograph. Now, entering through the front doors in daylight, with purpose instead of a janitor's cart, the building felt different. Intimidating. The security guard at the desk checked her ID against a visitor list, printed out a badge, and directed her to the elevators serving floors 30 to 50. Whitmore and Associates occupied the entire 42nd floor. The elevator doors opened directly into their reception area, and Maya's breath caught. The space was all glass and steel, with furniture that looked like art installations and a view of the city that seemed to stretch forever. Behind a curved desk sat a receptionist who looked like she had stepped out of a fashion magazine. "Can I help you?" The woman's smile was professional but carried the subtle assessment Maya had grown used to, the quick scan that placed her somewhere on the economic hierarchy and found her wanting. "I have a 10 o'clock appointment with Richard Whitmore," Maya said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Maya Tibbet." The receptionist's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a flicker of something, surprise? Curiosity, crossing her face. "Of course, Miss Tibbet. Mr. Whitmore is expecting you. Please, have a seat. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "Water would be great, thank you," Maya said, settling into a chair that was more comfortable than her bed at home. She waited for exactly 7 minutes, watching well-dressed lawyers move through the space with the confidence of people who knew exactly where they belonged. Everything here spoke of money and power, the art on the walls, the fresh flowers on the reception desk, even the quality of the silence, insulated from the city noise far below. "Miss Tibbet?" A man appeared from a hallway, early 60s, silver hair, expensive suit that fit perfectly. "I'm Richard Whitmore." Thank you for coming. His handshake was firm, businesslike. He led her down a corridor lined with conference rooms, each named after something legal-sounding, into a corner office that made the reception area look modest. The view here was spectacular, the entire city spread out like a promise. Please, sit, Whitmore said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. He settled into his own seat and opened a folder, his expression settling into something careful, almost gentle. Ms. Tibbet, I want to start by saying that what I'm about to tell you is going to be quite shocking. I've been practicing law for 34 years, and this is one of the more unusual situations I've encountered. Maya's hands gripped the arms of the chair. Okay. Your father, Jonathan Tibbet, was a very successful man. Extraordinarily successful, in fact. Whitmore paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. He was the co-founder and CEO of Vertex Technologies. Are you familiar with the company? Maya's mind went blank for a moment, then connected the dots with an almost audible click. Vertex Technologies. She had heard of them, everyone had. They were one of the major players in cloud computing and artificial intelligence, the kind of company whose logos appeared during tech conferences and Super Bowl commercials. She had never paid much attention because that world felt as distant to her as Mars. Yes, I've heard of them, she managed. Jonathan founded the company 23 years ago with 2 partners. It went public 15 years ago. Last year, Vertex's market valuation was approximately $47 billion. Whitmore let that sink in for a moment. Jonathan owned 28% of the company when he died. He also had substantial other investments, real estate, and assets. The numbers were too large to mean anything. Maya felt like she was listening to someone speak a foreign language. Billion. 28%. The words bounced off her understanding like stones off water. I don't understand, she said slowly. If my father was so successful, why didn't I know? Why did he never? She trailed off, unable to articulate the hurt. Whitmore's expression softened further. I can't speak to your father's personal decisions, Ms. Tibbet. I only met him in a professional capacity when he updated his will 8 months ago. But I can tell you that he was very explicit in his instructions. You are named as the sole beneficiary of his estate. The room seemed to tilt. Maya gripped the chair arms harder. What does that mean, exactly? It means, Whitmore said carefully, that you are now one of the wealthiest women in America. The exact valuation is still being finalized, but your inheritance is estimated at approximately $13 billion. The words did not make sense. They could not make sense. Maya had worked 2 jobs yesterday. She had $17 in tips in her pocket. She had calculated this morning whether she could afford both groceries and her phone bill this week. $13 billion was not a number that connected to her reality in any meaningful way. I think there's been a mistake, Maya heard herself say. That's not possible. I assure you, there's no mistake. I have all the documentation right here. Whitmore opened the folder fully, revealing pages of legal text. Your father was very specific. He left you everything, his company shares, his properties, his investment portfolio, his personal effects. Everything. Maya felt like she might be sick. The water she had drunk in the reception area threatened to come back up. Why? The question came out as almost a whisper. Why would he do that after abandoning me? I don't know, Whitmore said honestly. But he did include a letter for you. I'm required to give it to you as part of the estate settlement. He reached into the folder and pulled out a sealed envelope, cream-colored, expensive paper. On the front, in handwriting Maya did not recognize, was written simply, Maya. Her hand trembled as she took it. The envelope felt heavy, weighted with years of absence and questions. She looked at Whitmore. Can I? Of course. Take all the time you need. I'll step out for a few minutes. He stood and quietly left the office, closing the door behind him. Before we continue, I need you to help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. Please subscribe to my channel and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Now, let's continue. Maya sat alone in the corner office, 42 floors above the city, holding a letter from a dead father she barely remembered. Outside the window, Seattle continued its morning, oblivious to the fact that her entire life had just fractured into before and after. With shaking fingers, she broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. My dearest Maya, If you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're probably confused and angry. You have every right to be. I have no excuse for my absence from your life, only explanations, which are not the same thing. When I left your mother, it was because I was a coward. We were struggling financially, fighting constantly, and I convinced myself that I was the problem. I thought leaving would somehow make things better for both of you. I was 28 years old and terrified of failing as a husband and father, so I chose to fail by simply not being there. It's the worst decision I ever made. I started Verdicts 2 years after I left. The company became successful beyond anything I imagined. And with each year that passed, the gap between us grew wider, until I convinced myself it was too late to reach back across it. How could I appear in your life after 5 years? After 10? After 15? What possible explanation could justify my absence? So I stayed away. I told myself I was protecting you from disappointment, but really, I was protecting myself from facing what I'd done. I was a coward twice, once in leaving, and again in staying gone. I followed your life from a distance. I know about your mother's death. I know you work hard, live humbly, struggle with bills I could have paid with pocket change. Each fact was another knife of shame. I'm sorry. The words are inadequate, but they're all I have. I'm leaving you everything because it should have been yours all along. The money, the success, none of it brought me happiness. I spent 20 years building an empire while you built a life without me. You learned to stand on your own, to work, to survive. That's worth more than anything I achieved. Use this wealth however you see fit. Build something good with it. Or don't. You owe me nothing, least of all forgiveness. But know that my greatest regret, the thing I thought about every single day, was walking away from you. You deserved a better father. I'm sorry I wasn't him. Jonathan. Maya read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face and dripping onto her second-hand blazer. The words were everything and nothing. An explanation without an excuse. An apology that could not undo 20 years. A gift that felt like both salvation and burden. She sat in that office for 15 minutes, crying quietly, mourning a father she had barely known and now never would. Mourning the years lost, the relationship that could have been, the questions that would never be answered face to face. When Whitmore knocked softly and re-entered, Maya had composed herself somewhat. Her eyes were red, her face blotchy, but she was breathing normally again. I'm sorry, Whitmore said quietly. I know this is overwhelming. What happens now? Maya asked, her voice rough from crying. Now, Whitmore said, settling back into his chair, we begin the process of transferring everything to your name. It will take several months to finalize all the legal details, but I can arrange for immediate access to funds if you need them. Within 48 hours, I can have several $1 million transferred to an account in your name. Several $1 million. 48 hours ago, $17 in tips had felt significant. The scale of this change was incomprehensible. There are also matters regarding the company, Whitmore continued. As the largest shareholder, you'll have considerable influence over Verdicts' direction. The board will want to meet with you. The media will certainly find out soon, if they haven't already. You'll need security, financial advisors, legal representation beyond our firm. I can help coordinate all of this, but ultimately, these are decisions you'll need to make. Maya's head was spinning. Board meetings. Media. Security. These were words from a different universe, not her world of alarm clocks at 4:47 a.m. and cracked phone screens. I don't know anything about running a tech company, she said, almost laughing at the absurdity. You don't have to run it, Whitmore assured her. Verdicts has an excellent executive team. Your role as majority shareholder can be as involved or hands-off as you choose. But these are conversations for later. Right now, you need time to process all of this. I have a shift at the cafe at 2 o'clock, Maya said automatically, then realized how ridiculous that sounded. She looked at Whitmore. I don't, do I? I don't have to go back to either of my jobs. No, he said gently. You don't. The concept was dizzying. For 3 years, every moment of her life had been structured around work and survival. The mental calendar in her head that tracked every shift, every bill, every dollar, it was suddenly obsolete. She could quit. She could walk out of this building and never clean another office or make another latte. The freedom was terrifying. I'd like to recommend something, Whitmore said. Take a few days. Let this settle. Don't make any major decisions yet. The money isn't going anywhere. The company will be fine. Give yourself permission to adjust. Maya nodded slowly. That made sense. She could not process this all at once. She needed time, space, probably therapy. She left Whitmore and Associates 2 hours later with a folder of documents she barely understood, a business card for a wealth management firm, and a check for $50,000, just to tide you over, Whitmore had said, as if $50,000 was a casual amount. The elevator ride down felt like descending from another planet. When she stepped out onto the street, the city looked the same as it had 2 hours ago, but Maya knew she had fundamentally changed. She was the same person who had arrived, and yet entirely different. Her phone rang. Tom from the cafe, probably wondering where she was. She looked at the screen, at the cracks she could now afford to fix, and made a decision. She answered. Tom, I'm so sorry. I can't come in today. Actually, I can't come in ever again. I'm quitting. There was a confused pause. Maya, are you okay? Did something happen? Something happened, she said, looking up at the tower where her life had just changed. Something really big. I'll explain later, but, thank you. For everything. You were a good boss. She hung up before he could respond and called the cleaning company next. 2 conversations, 2 lives left behind. Maya walked through downtown Seattle in a daze, past coffee shops she could now buy outright, past boutiques whose window displays had always been aspirational fantasies. She could walk into any store and buy anything. The thought made her feel untethered, floating. She found herself in a small park, sitting on a bench, watching people hurry past on their lunch breaks. Everyone was moving with purpose, with destinations and deadlines. She had neither anymore. The structure that had defined her life had evaporated in a single morning. What now? Her father's letter was in her purse. His words echoed in her mind, use this wealth however you see fit. Build something good with it. For the first time since entering Whitmore's office, Maya allowed herself to think beyond the shock. She thought about the regulars at Brew and Bean, the college student counting quarters, the young mother who looked so tired. She thought about her co-workers at the cleaning company, all of them juggling multiple jobs, all of them trapped in the same cycle of work and worry she had just escaped. She thought about her mother, who had worked herself to exhaustion and still died owing money to hospitals. About the medical debt that had crushed them both. About every person she had ever met who was one emergency away from financial disaster. $13 billion. The number was starting to feel more real. Not as money she could spend, but as power. Potential. The ability to change things. Maya pulled out her phone and looked up the Vertex Technologies website. The company her father built. The company she now, somehow, controlled. The homepage featured sleek graphics and buzzwords about innovation and technology. But buried in their corporate information was something that caught her eye, a small mention of charitable initiatives, mostly tax write-off stuff. What if it could be more? An idea began forming, nebulous and ambitious. She did not know anything about running a company. But she knew what it felt like to choose between medication and groceries. She knew the weight of medical debt. She knew the exhaustion of working 2 jobs and still falling behind. What if Vertex, with all its resources and technology, focused some of its considerable power on solving those problems? What if she used this inheritance not just for herself, but to make sure fewer people had to live the way she had lived? The idea terrified her. She was 26 years old. She had a high school diploma and half a community college degree completed online. What did she know about corporate philanthropy or social change? But then again, what did her father know about any of this when he started? He had built something from nothing. Maybe she could build something from something. Maya stood from the bench, her decision crystallizing. She would not pretend to be someone she was not. She would not try to become her father or fit into some corporate mold. But she could learn. She could listen to people who knew more than her. And she could stay connected to the reality she had just left behind, use it to guide what came next. She thought about her studio apartment, her second-hand clothes, her cracked phone. Part of her wanted to run out and upgrade everything immediately, to dive into this new wealth with abandon. But another part, the part that had learned to survive on $17 in tips, knew that would be a mistake. She needed to move slowly, deliberately. Keep one foot in her old reality while stepping into the new one. Remember where she came from, even as she figured out where she was going. Maya walked back toward her neighborhood, taking the bus like always, sitting among people who had no idea the girl in the too big blazer had $13 billion. She liked the anonymity. She suspected she would not have it for much longer. That evening, in her studio apartment, Maya opened her laptop and started researching verdicts, technologies, corporate structures, philanthropic foundations, healthcare debt relief programs. She read until her eyes burned, taking notes in a spiral notebook that had cost 99 cents. Around midnight, she stopped and looked around her tiny apartment. This place had been her whole world for 3 years. Tomorrow, she could afford any home she wanted. But tonight, she stayed here, in this familiar space, bridging the gap between who she had been this morning and who she was becoming. She thought about calling someone, sharing this impossible news. But who? She had work friends, but no one close. Her mother was gone. She had no siblings, no extended family she knew of. The loneliness of her life hit her suddenly. Wealth could not change the fact that she was fundamentally alone in processing this. No, not alone. She had Whitmore, at least professionally. And soon, she would have advisors, lawyers, people whose jobs involved guiding her through this. She would build a team. She would learn. Maya lay in her narrow bed that night, staring at the ceiling water stain, and allowed herself to imagine a foundation in her mother's name, focusing on medical debt relief, investments in affordable housing, maybe something focused on helping people like her, single parents, working poor, people trapped in cycles they could not break alone. The ideas flowed, overwhelming and exciting. She grabbed her notebook and started writing in the dark, not wanting to lose any of it. Build something good, her father had written. She would. Not to honor him, he did not deserve that, not after 20 years of absence. But to honor her mother, who had worked herself to death and deserved better. To honor every person she had ever worked alongside, everyone who had shown her kindness when she was struggling. She would use this impossible gift to make sure fewer people had to live the way she had lived. That felt right. That felt like purpose. Maya fell asleep with the notebook open on her chest, her mind full of plans and possibilities. Outside, the city continued its rhythms, unaware that one of its hardest-working residents had just become one of its most powerful. The next morning, Maya woke up differently. Same apartment, same alarm, but everything changed. She made coffee from fresh grounds, a small indulgence she could now afford infinity times over, and called Whitmore. I want to meet with the verdicts board, she said when he answered. And I want to start setting up a foundation. Can you help me with that? Of course, Whitmore replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice. When would you like to start? Now, Maya said, looking around her studio apartment one last time as the life she had known. I'd like to start now. 3 days later, Maya found herself seated in a glass-walled conference room on the 38th floor of Verdicts Technologies headquarters. 12 impeccably dressed executives sat across from her, polished and composed, every one of them radiating the quiet authority of people accustomed to being in control. This was the board of directors. Her board, at least on paper. In reality, their guarded expressions made it clear they had not fully accepted that fact. The meeting opened with formal condolences for her father's death, delivered with practiced sympathy that felt distant and impersonal. Maya couldn't help noticing the absence behind the words. None of them had attended his funeral. According to the estate attorney, it had been a small, private affair attended only by business associates. No family. No friends. Just colleagues mourning the loss of a profitable mind. The conversation quickly shifted to the company's future. The board emphasized stability, market perception, and investor confidence. They framed the situation as delicate, unprecedented, something that required careful handling. Maya listened closely, aware that beneath the polished language was a clear message. They wanted continuity without disruption. They wanted her invisible. When she expressed her desire to be involved, to truly understand the business rather than remain a passive beneficiary, the mood in the room subtly changed. Polite smiles tightened. Glances were exchanged. The resistance was immediate, though carefully masked behind reassurances about strong executive leadership and the benefits of hands-off ownership. Maya made it clear that she had no intention of remaining on the sidelines. She stated her desire to sit on the board, asserting her rights as the majority shareholder. The reaction was swift and dismissive. Concerns were raised about her lack of experience, the complexity of corporate governance, and the risks of involving someone without a traditional background in finance or technology. She held her ground. She insisted on her legal entitlement, making it clear she was prepared to pursue it. The board chair deferred the discussion, redirecting the meeting toward estate management strategies and financial planning. But Maya interrupted again, this time steering the conversation toward corporate responsibility. She challenged the company's philanthropic efforts, describing them as safe, superficial, and designed primarily for optics. She outlined a vision for something more meaningful, a foundation dedicated to medical debt relief and affordable healthcare access. The proposal landed heavily in the room. The board pushed back. They framed philanthropy as a secondary concern, subordinate to shareholder value and market performance. Maya reminded them, quietly but firmly, that she was the primary shareholder. Her response exposed a deeper divide. Where they spoke of strategy and numbers, she spoke from lived experience. She described what it meant to choose between medication and groceries, to feel the crushing weight of medical debt. What they dismissed as emotion, she defined as perspective. The meeting unraveled from there. Voices rose, though never unprofessionally. Arguments overlapped. Positions hardened. Maya realized, with unsettling clarity, that these people did not see her as a partner. They saw her as a threat. An inexperienced outsider who had stumbled into power and might disrupt the system they had perfected. The meeting ended without resolution. No agreements. No compromises. Just restrained hostility disguised as concern. As Maya left the building, the weight of her new reality pressed down on her. This was what she had inherited, along with the fortune. Before she could fully process it, her phone rang. An unfamiliar number. Against her better judgment, she answered. Within moments, she understood the consequences of her father's wealth becoming public record. A journalist had already uncovered the details of the will. The narrative was forming without her consent. She refused to comment and ended the call, but it was too late. Within hours, her phone became unusable. By evening, her face was splashed across news sites, her life reduced to headlines that framed her transformation as spectacle rather than circumstance. The coverage was not cruel, but it was invasive, dissecting her past, her family, her grief. By the next morning, photographers waited outside her apartment. Maya stood at her window, watching them, realizing that even her home was no longer safe from scrutiny. She reached out to Whitmore for help. The response was immediate. Security was arranged. A new phone. A temporary residence in a secured building. Within days, a full team assembled around her, legal, financial, and media professionals whose job was not to ask how she felt, but to manage how she was perceived. Her media consultant made it clear that silence was no longer an option. The story was already out. The only choice left was whether Maya would shape it herself or let others define her. Exhausted but pragmatic, Maya agreed to an interview on her own terms. 2 weeks later, the article ran. It painted her not as a novelty, but as a person. A reluctant heiress. A survivor. The response was overwhelming. Supportive messages mixed with requests for money, favors, opportunities. Every relationship shifted under the weight of her wealth. Saying no became as painful as saying yes. Old connections felt strained, transactional. Boundaries became necessary, even when they hurt. 2 months after the inheritance, Maya finally secured her board seat. Not through goodwill, but through legal pressure. In her first official meeting, she listened more than she spoke, absorbing the language and logic of power. But when the discussion turned to cutting employee wellness programs to boost margins, she challenged the priorities at the table. She lost the vote. But not entirely. A small number of board members sided with her. Enough to matter. Later, one of them offered quiet encouragement, acknowledging that Maya was thinking like an owner, not merely a shareholder. It was the first genuine affirmation she had received in weeks. That night, in her new apartment, still unfamiliar, still impersonal, Maya began planning the foundation in earnest. She named it after her mother. The initial funding commitment was bold, even shocking. $1 billion. It was the first decision that felt entirely, unquestionably hers. Setting up the foundation was more complex than she had imagined. Lawyers, accountants, non-profit specialists, all working to create the structure. Maya insisted on hiring people with actual experience in healthcare and poverty advocacy, not just corporate types. She wanted the foundation to be real, to actually help people, not just be a tax shelter with good PR. 6 months after her father's death, the foundation made its first major intervention, purchasing and forgiving $23 million in medical debt for 12,000 families across Washington state. The people affected received letters informing them their debt had been eliminated, that they owed nothing, that they could move forward without that weight. Maya read some of the responses they received. Letters from people crying with relief, parents who could now afford to feed their children properly, people who had been living in constant fear of collectors. Each letter was a small validation that this was real, that she was doing something that mattered. But not everyone was happy. A business columnist wrote a scathing piece about how she was playing at charity instead of focusing on running verdicts properly. Some shareholders grumbled that she should be maximizing value, not giving it away. Her media consultant fielded multiple requests for her to comment on the controversy of a billionaire actually using their money to help people. The criticism stung, but Maya was learning to live with it. You could not please everyone. You could not make everyone understand. All you could do was try to do good work and hope it mattered. 8 months in, Maya faced her biggest challenge yet. A cousin appeared, Randy Tibbett, son of her father's brother, claiming he deserved part of the inheritance. He sued, arguing that Jonathan had been mentally unstable when he wrote the will, that Maya had unduly influenced him despite never having contact with him. The lawsuit was garbage, legally speaking. Whitmore assured her it would be dismissed. But it was painful, messy, public. Randy gave interviews painting himself as the wronged family member, Maya as the opportunistic daughter who had manipulated a dying man. Never mind that she had not even known her father was alive, let alone dying. The case dragged on for 3 months before being thrown out. Maya won, but the victory felt hollow. She had been forced to relive her father's abandonment in court documents, to defend herself against accusations that she had somehow schemed her way into this inheritance. The stress of it left her exhausted, questioning everything. One particularly bad night, alone in her apartment, Maya seriously considered just giving it all away. Setting up trusts to donate everything to charity and walking away from the whole mess. She could go back to being nobody, to the simplicity of a life without constant scrutiny and criticism. She got as far as drafting an email to Whitmore before she stopped herself. No. This was hard, but it was also an opportunity to do real good. How many people would kill for this chance? She had the resources to actually change lives, to address problems that destroyed families. Walking away would be the easy choice, the coward's choice. Her father had been a coward. She would not be. Maya deleted the email and went to bed. The 1-year anniversary of her father's death passed quietly. Maya visited his grave for the first time, a simple headstone in a cemetery outside Seattle, nothing ostentatious. She stood there in the rain, looking at his name carved in marble, and tried to feel something other than complicated ambiguity. "I'm trying," she said to the stone. "I'm trying to do what you asked. Build something good. I don't know if I'm doing it right, but I'm trying." The stone, predictably, offered no response. But Maya felt something shift in herself. Acceptance, maybe. Her father had been flawed, selfish, brilliant, and broken. He had given her an impossible gift wrapped in 20 years of abandonment. She could spend forever being angry about it, or she could take what he left and make something better than his regret. She chose the latter. By the end of her first year as a billionaire, the Elizabeth Tibbett Foundation had forgiven $87 million in medical debt for over 40,000 families, funded 3 free clinics in low-income Seattle neighborhoods, established a scholarship program for students from working-class backgrounds, partnered with hospitals to create payment plans that would not destroy people financially. It was not enough. It would never be enough. Poverty and medical debt were systemic problems that could not be solved by one person's money. But it was something. It was real help for real people. Maya also changed things at verdicts, slowly, fighting for every inch. She pushed through a minimum wage increase for all employees. She expanded parental leave policies. She insisted on environmental sustainability measures even when they cut into margins. The board fought her on almost everything, but she was learning to be strategic, to pick her battles, to build alliances. She was also learning to live in this new reality. She moved into a house, not a mansion, but a comfortable home with a garden where she could grow vegetables like her mother used to. She hired a small staff, not because she needed servants, but because employing people at fair wages with good benefits was its own form of redistribution. She stayed in touch with a few people from her old life who had proven they cared about her, not her money. And she learned to recognize the ones who only saw dollar signs. That night, Maya sat in her garden as the sun set, a cup of coffee in her hands, good coffee, expensive beans, but she made it herself because some things felt important to do personally. She thought about the year behind her and the years ahead. The work would continue. The fights with the board would continue. The media scrutiny would continue. The complicated relationship with wealth would continue. But so would the good. The families freed from debt. The clinics providing care. The scholarships changing lives. The small acts of redistribution that added up to something meaningful. Her phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from someone at the foundation. We just got the final count on this month's debt forgiveness. 1,400 families. $3.2 million. 1,400 families who could breathe easier tonight. It was not everything, but it was something. Maya smiled, sipped her coffee, and watched the stars come out over Seattle. The city where she had struggled and survived, and was now learning to thrive, not despite her past, but because of it. Somewhere out there were people who had worked 2 jobs today, who would work 2 jobs tomorrow, who were living the life she had lived. She could not save them all, but she could save some. And that was enough to keep trying. She was the reluctant heiress, the barista billionaire, the girl who inherited a fortune she never asked for. But more than that, she was Maya Tibbet, still figuring it out, still learning, still trying to build something good from something complicated. And for now, that was exactly who she needed to be. If you've ever felt like your life was going nowhere, like you were stuck in a cycle you couldn't break, I want you to know that change can come from the most unexpected places. It might not be an inheritance. It might be a conversation, an opportunity, a decision you make when you're at your lowest point. What would you do if you suddenly had the resources to change not just your life, but other people's lives? Would you stay true to who you are, or would you let the money change you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, if Maya's journey touched something in your heart, hit that like button and subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear that their current situation isn't their final destination. Because none of our stories are over yet. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.